Hello, my name is Derek Karpel. I'm the founder and principal of Karpel Insurance Services, a full-service insurance brokerage here in Los Angeles.
I'm Derek Karpel, founder and CEO of K.I.G. Property Management, a real estate investment and property management firm here in Los Angeles.
Today's guest is Tim Gaspar. Tim is an entrepreneur, community leader, and a candidate for Los Angeles City Council in District 3. District 3 covers a large portion of the San Fernando Valley, including communities like Woodland Hills, Tarzana, Reseda, Canoga Park, and Winnetka. Tim is a lifelong San Fernando Valley resident, born and raised in Canoga Park, a graduate of El Camino Real High School, Pierce College, and Cal State Northridge. In 2008, Tim founded Gaspar Insurance Services, which has grown into one of the largest independent insurance agencies in Los Angeles. Along the way, he's been active in the community through organizations like the Woodland Hills Chamber of Commerce, the YMCA, and the Discovery Cube Los Angeles. And now Tim is stepping into the political arena, bringing a business owner's perspective to the issues facing Los Angeles. Tim's campaign has earned endorsements from current council member Bob Blumenfeld, Assembly member Jackie Irwin, council member John Lee and Tim McOsker, former LA Controller and former CD3 council member Laura Chick, former State Senate Majority Leader Bob Hertzberg, and more than 100 community business leaders across the San Fernando Valley. Perhaps his greatest endorsement, of course, is from his wife Christina, a former FBI agent, and his two kids, Ryan and Jonathan. And with the primary election coming up on June 2nd, we're very honored to have Tim join us today to tell us about his thoughts on how he's going to help Los Angeles. Awesome, Tim. So for those of us who don't know you, I'd love for you to just kind of give us a quick background about who you are and what brought you here today.
Sure. Well, at the end of the day, I'm just a guy. I'm not a politician, at least not yet. Hopefully, I suppose I will be. But yeah, I'll give you a little bit about my background. I'm a Valley kid. I was born in Panorama City. I grew up in the communities of Canoga Park and Woodland Hills. My dad worked for the city, went to all public local schools, went to El Camino for high school, put myself through Pierce, put myself through CSUN. While I was in high school, I was always an entrepreneur, so I had different businesses, and they had a moon bounce business, if you remember. Well, they still have them, the giant inflatables that kids jump in. So I had those, so when I got out of high school, I probably had a dozen of those, and cotton candy machines and snow cone machines. And so I told my parents, I said, look, I'm not going to college. And they were just, definitely not happy with that decision and tried hard to talk me into going to college. But I said, no, I'm an entrepreneur. I look up to people like, Richard Branson with the Virgin brands, and this is what I'm going to do. So I moved forward with my business, and then a buddy of mine came up with a product. We were 18 years old, and he comes up with a product that it looked like a Pepsi bottle you would buy from like a gas station, but the top came off and you could hide stuff in it. And so this product ended up taking off, and we were selling thousands of them every month. We're 18 years old, 19 years old, and the business is going really well. We have a warehouse in Chatsworth where we're manufacturing them, and then one day there's a knock on the door, and it's a half a dozen attorneys from Pepsi-Cola from Chicago. So not the type of visitor that you want to get. And we thought we would get like a cease and desist letter, but apparently this was way beyond that. And so they sued us. And so when I was 19 years old, I actually had to file bankruptcy.
Oh my gosh.
And so my parents thought, we knew this wouldn't go well skipping college, but this is far worse than anybody
What they could have even imagined at that point.
Nobody could have guessed this. And so at that time, filed bankruptcy, and I had owed people money at that point, so I had to work, different odd jobs. I worked at P.F. Chang's as a food runner. I worked graveyard shift for one of those fulfillment companies where people call for get rich quick schemes or pills and stuff, and did that, whatever I could do to make ends meet and pay people back, and started getting my life put back together. And I met my wife around that time, and I always joke that she really likes a project, apparently. But she said, look, you got to at least go back to school if you're going to meet my parents. So I started going to Pierce at night, and eventually went to CSUN, and got into the insurance business at that point. So I worked for a firm for a few years and learned the business, but I knew that I still wanted to be an entrepreneur. That was still very much something that I was passionate about. So in my early 20s, I started an insurance firm, Gaspar Insurance, and I grew that firm for about 16 years until I had about 65 employees, and really just enjoyed the process of building something, of something that provided value to both customers and the employees that worked there. It was really, for me, a passion being an entrepreneur. But while I was doing that, I was also very involved in the community and always wanted to be investing in the community, because the reality is I love the Valley. I'm third generation. My dad loved the Valley. His dad loved the Valley. And so I was volunteering with organizations, you mentioned like the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, the Discovery Cube, the Chamber, any sort of organization that was focused on young people or small business or just making the Valley better in general are the types of things that I've been interested in, because that's where my heart is, and those are all things that make our San Fernando Valley better. And then, looking at how I could have the most impact on the community, the city council seat is uniquely positioned to do exactly that. And I was looking to, for my next chapter in life professionally, and I could see that Bob Blumenfield was terming out. So from a timing standpoint, I thought this is the best time to go run for office. And also, I was frustrated with some of the things I was seeing in the city of Los Angeles, and I suppose we're probably going to talk about some of those things today.
Yeah. I appreciate that background. I love that story that your wife loves a project.
She does. And if you ask her, it's ongoing.
Well,
it's ongoing.
A lot of ones probably feel that way about
their
their
relate to that, I'm sure. Yeah,
for sure. Well, you have a project now, not only to win this primary, but to win the general election. But I think we're Valley born and raised, Valley boys ourselves, and we're seeing a lot of the challenges that LA writ large has. But I'd be curious, just if you could expand on that. Like, what were some of those things that you were seeing? Obviously, Jared and I have seen some challenges. What were maybe some fundamental things, or some things that occurred in your life, or specific things that you saw that made that decision for you?
So right around 2021, the first thing I noticed was the defund the police movement. And I get that, that came from a place that was authentic with the George Floyd murder, and obviously that was a terrible thing, and so there was a move to make sure that people were prioritizing social justice, which is something that I agree with. The thing is, people in LA started going after LAPD when LAPD wasn't involved in any of these scandals. And the LAPD, I would argue, are probably the most finely trained police officers in the country, if not the world. And so seeing the defund the police movement, and then around the same time, just pretty much everybody in city council deciding to endorse George Gascon. George Gascon, I'll give him credit, he was honest about what his plans were, which were basically not to charge people for crimes, which, if there's no consequences for crimes, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going to happen. And so that was really tough to watch, and we saw what happened as the city started to fall apart as a result. Our approach to homelessness, which for a number of years seemed to be do nothing, for lack of a better way to put it, and then the way we were treating business people, and specifically folks that owned homes or had apartment buildings where there was a moratorium in the city for 5 years after COVID, where folks could not be evicted, and these weren't nobody had to prove that they were impacted by COVID. So unfortunately, you had folks that took advantage of that, and for the city to tell one group of people, anybody who owned a rental unit, hey, you're going to pay for this other group of people, that is something that's inherently unfair, because you have retired folks that own an ADU or own a home that they depend on that money to be able to make ends meet. And so for the city to put them in a position where they can't pay their own bills, I thought was something that it just wasn't fair at the end of the day. And of course, it was going to have the impact of chasing investment out of the city, and that's exactly what it's done.
Yeah, I definitely want to expand on that a little bit. You and I have talked personally, and I remember you mentioned to me a specific time where you were a victim of crime.
That's right.
And I think that really resonated, because I think it's very easy for us to talk about, okay, we're seeing all the problems that are affecting kind of the city as a whole, but you yourself experienced crime, and I think it'd be interesting to share with those specific things, and maybe how that propelled you to start going along this path that you're currently on.
So it was shortly before I decided to officially run for office, before I filed the paperwork. So I came home one night with my family around 6 p.m. on a weeknight, just before the holidays, and walked into the house. You never walk into a room and know something's different without knowing what it is. Sure. So I immediately got that feeling. I'm looking, and the back door to my house is gone, just completely gone. And you realize it right away, oh man, I've been burglarized, which is such a shocking feeling. And so I called 911, and I think this was the most surprising part of the whole ordeal, outside of the actual burglary, is when I called 911, I was on hold for 30 minutes. And I wasn't transferred to non-emergency. It wasn't a situation where somebody said, can you please hold? It was 30 minutes before I got a live person. So I thought, well, it's a good thing I'm not having a heart attack or bleeding to death, God forbid. And so was ultimately able to get a hold of an operator, and ultimately, the police came and took a report, and then of course, things were taken, and the back door was destroyed. But it was a difficult situation to go through, because anyone who's been burglarized, you definitely feel like your personal space has obviously been violated. But it was eye-opening to see that the city was truly and is truly broken, because even when you see, trash on the street or street lights don't work, I always thought, well, I saw those things, but I thought, well, but at least like, if I really need the important stuff, like an ambulance or a police officer, I know that works. I just assumed, probably, you know, I probably shouldn't have assumed, but I assumed that 911 would still pick up right away. And so going through that experience made me realize, no, the city really is broken, even for the things that are most important to us as the folks that actually live here.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that, if you don't mind. So you mentioned a couple of times the city is broken. In what ways are you seeing them broken? Sure. And what's your vision? What's your plan to get us unbroken? If you will?
Sure.
Be that project, you know. Your wife has that
exactly
project.
Yeah.
What is she's? Maybe we should interview your wife next time. What
Probably a good
project's
idea, actually, for sure. That's right. So there's so many different ways that the city has really ceased to function. But we'll start with the public safety piece. And so here in the West Valley, you know, you might have seen in news stories, the police department currently has a little bit over 8,000 officers, which our goal has always been 10,000, but our goal was 10,000 when we had 1 million less people. And so in reality, we really need about 12,000 officers to be able to actually keep people safe. So having 8,000 officers, like what that actually looks like is, number one, it's hard to have the minimum number of patrol cars actually on the street. And when it comes to special units like gambling, human trafficking, those units are not able to operate when we have so few officers. So Topanga Division used to have 220 officers. Now they have 198. So they're not able to have any of those specialized units. And so that's obviously a significant issue. And the same thing is true with the fire department. We saw what happened with the Palisades fire, obviously. And you know, here in the West Valley, west of the 405, LAFD has 2 types of ambulances. They have one type of ambulance that they send to transport people, and if you sprain your ankle or something like that. But then they have a type of ambulance, an advanced life-saving ambulance that they send if your life is in danger. And currently in the West Valley, actually west of the 405, we have a total of 4 of them. 4 of them total. So if you need an ambulance, there's actually a pretty good chance the ambulances that are here will already be out on calls. They might have to call an ambulance from Sylmar, North Hollywood, maybe even into LA somewhere. And so just public safety-wise, that's a huge issue. And I think the biggest thing we need to do there is prioritize investment into our public safety, and also stop picking on them so much, to be frank, because you know, LAPD is the most scrutinized police department in the country. They can't lift a finger without, you know, somebody in the city calling them out, or the LA Times putting them on the front page. And I think at a certain point, you have to imagine the officers and think what it would be like to go through that, and be able to recognize how difficult that job is, and be able to be empathetic and cut these guys some slack, for a better way to put it. So the public safety piece is critical. And the business piece, you know, LA has actively chased businesses out of the city by just, you know, certainly taking businesses for granted, taking their tax dollars for granted, you know, passing laws without thinking how it will actually impact businesses. So, you know, one example I would give is there was a motion that was passed for a $30 minimum wage for airport workers and hotel workers, which that comes from a good place, right? Because obviously we want people to be able to make ends meet. We all want people to be successful at the end of the day. Nobody wants anyone living in poverty. The problem is, if you go ahead and pass a law like that without really thinking about the impact of it or talking to business owners, it results in a loss of jobs. And I heard last week, there's a hotel in downtown LA right now, the Ace Hotel, that is 100% automated. With the exception of the janitorial staff, it's all automated. So you check in, whatever you need, you call as an off-site phone person. And so that's what the future holds if we continue to do that with jobs. When the fast food minimum wages were increased, there were studies that showed a lot of different results, but the most reputable study showed there were 1,200 jobs lost when the fast food minimum wage was increased. You walk into McDonald's, there's no people. It's a kiosk.
Right. And
so, and that, you know, the best thing we can do about that is the current city council has 15 people. Not one person has ever run a business, not one of them. So at least we can start by having somebody in the room who has that experience to be able to speak for businesses. So there's so many different things that are broken with LA, but I would start with those 2 pieces in particular. And then, of course, you know, make a list of the other things and a plan to go after them.
I want to respond real quickly to that. So what I'm hearing about the public safety, not only do we have a systemic issue, there's also a cultural issue.
That's right.
If we're going to continue to bash on the police department, what is going to inspire young people to give back to their community?
Exactly
if they're
right.
going to be shamed by the LA Times or social media, whatever it may be.
That's right.
Well,
Yep.
how are you going to inspire young people to get back into community service? And I know we're going to touch on it because I know it's an important issue to you.
Sure.
The other thing I thought about when you were speaking is, for those of us to hear, okay, well, McDonald's has to raise their minimum wage. It's like a punch in the eye for McDonald's. Like, who cares? We think of these large corporations.
Yeah,
what does it matter? They
Yep.
can afford it. But I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, about how many residents in Los Angeles are small business owners, and when we're seeing these laws passed, how is that impacting? Again, we see it impacting larger business. They can recoil from that faster. But I suspect that that's not happening for smaller businesses, which Jared and I both own, and you've owned yourself. I'd
That's
be curious
exactly
what
right.
you think.
Yeah, so it's the small business owners that actually get hit the worst with these things because the policies and the laws that we have in LA, they're not directed only towards big companies, but they impact everybody. And so when you increase minimum wage for a mom and pop, it's very difficult for them to be able to absorb that. And the reality is, even when it comes to fast food being an example, most fast food restaurants are actually mom and pop business owners. They're individual franchise owners.
Right.
It's not like a corporate, McDonald's location. I'm not even sure if they have those anymore. Generally speaking, it's a franchise operated company. And so it's the mom and pops that we chase out of the city. And part of that is outside of just things like that increase the cost, just the sheer amount of laws that we have in LA and additional things that business owners need to know to keep from being sued. It is so incredibly complicated that even a mom and pop, I feel like, needs to have an employment attorney on full time almost. And what happens in those cases is the mom and pop businesses don't have the resources to be able to actually comply with all those things. And so they go out of business, and what replaces them is one of these larger corporations that does have the ability to comply with these things, and we end up losing our mom and pop businesses. And that's exactly what's happening in the city of Los Angeles right now.
So we're seeing that right now in the real estate housing provider scenario in many different aspects, which I'd like to get your thoughts on. One of them that's most recent that kind of you touched on and remind me of, we have a client who just bought, she's a graduate student. She's trying to set herself up for success in the future, borrowed some money, what have you, from her grandparents, and ultimately bought an 11-unit apartment building in North Hollywood. The tenant, who is a Section 8 voucher, pays very little to no rent. We walked in there, the inspected her unit. It's disgusting. I could not walk in, Tim, when I tell you, I was there for 30 seconds, I had to walk out. Wow. Just from excrement from her pets to food being left out, etc. Roaches are now infesting her unit. She's looking to sue us and my client for habitability claims.
Wow.
The problem is, not only is she contributory negligence, right? She's not complying with pest control and our instructions, et cetera, but when she tendered her claim, the lawsuit, to her insurance company, they denied because habitability is an exclusion under the policy. Yep. So now this mom and pop business owner, essentially, housing provider, is having to pay out of pocket to defend this lawsuit, hire a lawyer to defend this lawsuit, pay out of pocket to settle the claims. And she said to me the other day, she said, Jared, I don't even want this anymore. I want to sell the building and I'll go invest in Texas or Florida, what have you. Yep. So comment on that if you can. I know it kind of... Yeah.
It's terrible. I imagine being in those shoes, and that's just an awful situation to be in. And that's what LA does right now is, we create a scenario where folks that own property are really set up to fail because you obviously, you have an obligation to rent to Section 8. If you don't, you'll get sued. And by no means am I saying that someone who's Section 8 is going to destroy the building by any means.
Sure,
but when you have a tenant like that, you can't evict them because they destroy the inside of the unit. You'll get sued if you do, right? And so you're in a situation where you're sort of, stuck with this tenant in the building. If you try to do anything to remove them, you'll get sued. In a lot of cases, the city of Los Angeles will be paying for their attorney to be able to make sure that's the case. Right. And what happens is it's not just your client that's affected. It's all of the investors nationwide that might think about investing in LA. They're seeing things like this and they're thinking to themselves, why on earth would I want to invest in Los Angeles? Why would I want to build something? Why would I want to own property there? It looks like it'd be a total disaster because nobody wants to end up in the same spot that your client's in.
Yeah.
And if we don't have new investment coming into the city, we're stuck with the current housing stock that we have. We all know we have a housing crisis right now where rents are incredibly high, and this is the reason. And so that's one of the most frustrating things that I see on the city council is you have a city council that talks constantly about the cost of housing. We talk
Affordability,
about affordability.
yeah.
It's talked about every single day because it's a very real issue. But all of the things that our city council does, all the things they say they're doing to address that by putting in additional rules, by putting in additional rent control, the impact that it has is it keeps investors out of the city, limits the number of units available, and pushes rents higher. And they don't connect the dots in regard to their actions keeping rents high. They're doing what is politically popular and what people want to see, not what is effective. And as leaders, the job of someone in a leadership position is to be able to get the job done for people regardless of how popular it is. And I know that's something, naive for me to say as a politician. You obviously need votes, but the reality is you need to be willing to do what is hard and what is unpopular if that's what's going to work to actually help people, not just what people want to see if it's not what's best for the whole.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's not what we're seeing right now for the city.
I think it's a very different situation. What gets a lot of likes on social media versus what's actually effective.
That's exactly right.
Here. We talked about it. I think one of the big elephants in the room in Los Angeles is just the homelessness.
Yeah.
We've talked to many people. I mean, any local politician in Los Angeles, they're going to talk about the homeless crisis we have. I presume that there are a milieu of factors that have contributed to the homelessness here in Los Angeles. But I think we are tired of hearing empty promises and very little action. And curious where you think you can be effective in having a more sensible conversation, maybe without promising us the moon, but let's do something that at least something different than what we've already tried doing, which I'm not sure seems to be much of anything.
Which I think we've been trying to solve it by throwing money at the problem. And I'm not convinced that the homeless crisis is a money problem. But if you could just touch on this.
I think you're right, because there's certainly been no lack of money. So even this year, we're going to spend between $800 and $900 million as a city.
Unreal.
On the homeless, and we're just not going to get much out of that. When you take a look at the improvement, which might end up getting maybe, even if it's 10,000 people off the street, getting 10,000 people off the street is great. But if you spent $800 million to do it, then you have to recognize that's not something that is sustainable. We can't continue to do that as a city. We're already having very significant financial issues, and so it's certainly not a money problem. And so I think it has to do with how we address the issue. And there's also, you can't go and try to solve this problem with each homeless person the same way, because you have different scenarios. You have folks that it's not an economic issue, or maybe they lost their job or they've fallen on hard times and don't have a place to live. And then you have folks that maybe recently got out of jail, they have a criminal history, have a tougher time getting a job for that reason. And then you have a third bucket of folks that have addiction issues or mental health issues that need help. And each one of those things needs to be addressed differently. But I do think the one thing that needs to be sort of the common denominator with these things is we need to have the services available to actually be able to help these people. You can't just give somebody shelter without services and expect there to be a result. And that's actually what the city's done with this housing first policy, which is meet people where they're at, give them a roof, which I understand the thinking with that, but if you give somebody a roof without the services to go around it for what they actually need to get better, it's not going to work. And so the services piece is something that we have not been consistent with. And also, sometimes I think you have to have the carrot and the stick. And this is what San Francisco has done more recently to start to turn things around. So if you go to somebody who's on the street and you say, hey, you can't stay here, you can get help, or we're going to have to make an arrest, that being the stick. We can't arrest our way out of this issue. I'm not advocating for that at all. It's just like having that stick so that there's some consequence, because what we really want is that person to say, I guess I'll take the help, and to be able to get help to get better, but an option of staying on the street cannot be one of the options. And that would be the big change that we're not doing right now. Right now, we're more than happy to let somebody stay on the street until they die. That's the city's current plan. And that's not fair to the person that's on the street mostly, and also the surrounding community. So we need to force the issue to actually be able to help people.
Yeah, it's an odd thing that we somehow think it's empathetic to someone who is homeless, that to let them live there.
It's crazy.
That's someone's child.
That's right.
That's
Doesn't make any
someone's
sense.
parent. That's someone's sibling. And I mean, I can't imagine that that's the empathetic thing to do. I mean, we're a wealthy country. We certainly have the creative talent. We have the will to do things. And I think, you know, kind of going back, and I do want to talk about it, is that public service, like doing the right thing and the hard thing are often one and the same. I wanted to talk to you, shift a little bit. Curious because obviously here in Los Angeles, you're an insurance guy. I'm an insurance guy, and Jared deals with insurance constantly. You know, insurance.
I don't know how you guys do it, by the way.
Well, he became a politician. I guess that's the natural path out of it. Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, I always say, you know, what are they? What's the old line? The three things that are certain in life: death. What is it?
Taxes.
Death, taxes.
Are you adding insurance as the third one?
Sorry, what do they always say? Yes, I'm going to say that. Yeah.
Usually I think it's two.
Is it two? Okay.
It's two.
There's two
But if
things.
you have insurance, it's three.
So there are two things that are always death and taxes. I have now added insurance
It's
to
probably
it. Thank
true.
you.
Probably
yeah.
true. That's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
everything that Jared deals with in property management is I mean, not everything. I would say probably 90% of it has to deal with insurance.
I bet.
And if it's not insurance, it's complying with the city, the state, federal regulations, which of course has its own ripple effects at insurance. I think one thing that we can all agree about insurance is it's so opaque. People, I don't feel, it's like the one product people pay for, but they're not even sure they know what they're getting.
Yep.
And if they need it, whether or not it'll be there for them, the coverage,
absolutely.
you know.
Yep.
And so, I mean, health insurance, forget it. I don't think that's
for
something
sure.
we can solve on a city level.
Yep.
All I know
That's
is
true.
I'm always paying more, and whatever I need is never covered. It's
Yep.
always just, the money is just going
A lot
out
of people
one.
feel that way. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Me
But
too.
let's talk specifically about Los Angeles.
Yep.
We recently spoke to a candidate for California Insurance Commissioner, and we talked about the fact that the California FAIR Plan has become not just the plan of last resort, but it is the only plan right now. And I recognize this may be outside the purview of the City Council, but I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this, because this is something, like I said, death and taxes. Let's throw in insurance into this.
That's right. Yeah, it's the insurance, the rates in LA in regard to what people pay for personal insurance, like auto and home insurance. I think there's a tipping point that I've always worried about, where it would go from being grossly expensive into a tipping point where people just can't afford it, period.
Right.
And I think that's, generally speaking, where we're at. The challenge with insurance is when people get their insurance bill in the mail, they look at the bill and they see the huge number, or they see the fact that they're being canceled, and their immediate thought is, you know, dang, this insurance company, like, don't know, what are they doing? And they put the blame on the insurance company, but there's plenty of blame to go around for insurance companies. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure we have lots
None
of
of which
stories.
you or I were ever affiliated with, of course.
Of course. But the reality is, the number that you're looking at on the bill for the insurance is the end result of a lot of other things that are happening in the marketplace, and frankly, a lot of other things that are happening in Sacramento and in City Council. And so for home insurance specifically, because the reality is, most people that run for insurance commissioner don't have a background in insurance.
Most don't.
And most of the folks that have been elected for that job over the past few insurance commissioners at least, don't have any background in insurance. And what we saw happen with our current insurance commissioner, Laura, is, you know, we were starting to have a crisis with home insurance in LA and in California right around about 2021, as we were starting to come out of COVID a little bit. And what was happening is the insurance companies were seeing an increase in rates on auto insurance because accidents were starting to tick up. The cost to repair a car, remember the cost of used cars went up like 35%. That was part of it. And then for homes, because people were home more at that time, you had them overflowing toilets more, overflowing bathtubs. You did have a couple of very large fires like the Woolsey fire. So all of these stresses that started to push insurance companies, where when you looked at their books, there were insurance companies that were actually losing money. I know that's hard to believe because they're billion-dollar companies, but there were. Just on paper, they were paying out $1.10, $1.20 in claims when they were only collecting $1 in premium, right? And the numbers showed that. And when they went to the insurance commissioner to say, hey, we've got this issue where we're losing money, we need to increase our rates, it's not that the insurance commissioner denied that, he didn't return the phone call. And this went on for years. And after a couple of years of this, the insurance companies finally said, we can't continue to sell policies where we pay $1.20 and collect $1. we're leaving. And you had multiple companies start to leave the state. AIG was the first, one after another. Even the companies that didn't leave, and I'm sure you remember this, they went to us as agencies and said, hey, you can't sell any more policies. So, we're not going to leave, like Travelers and Hartford and Nationwide. We're not leaving. We just don't have any more policies to sell you, which is the same thing.
Right.
And then when State Farm decided to leave is when it finally made the media, right, where people actually started to notice. But this was, a lack of communication with the insurance commissioners, where all of the markets left the state. So what we got left with were a couple companies that were willing to even sell home insurance. So they got to charge whatever they want at this point because they're the only two companies left. And as a result, an incredible amount of money, an incredible amount of policies got pushed to the FAIR Plan. And the FAIR Plan told the commissioner, for the past 5 years, the FAIR Plan told the commissioner, you can't keep giving us this business. We don't have the people to be able to handle this. And God forbid there's ever a claim, we don't have the people or the money to actually be able to pay for it. The FAIR Plan was very clear about that with the insurance commissioner. And there was a complete and total lack of action by anyone in Sacramento to actually address this issue. It just didn't happen overnight. It wasn't even 6 months. This was years of nobody being willing to do the hard thing and sit down with the insurance companies and figure out what needed to be done. Instead, we let it turn into a crisis. And as a result of that crisis, when the Palisades fire hit, most of those people, most of them had already been canceled by the big carriers. So they either had FAIR Plan, a really expensive policy with Lloyd's of London, or if you're Spencer Pratt, no insurance at all. That was the result of this, and it was totally avoidable, which is why it's so frustrating to me to have seen this happen. And now, of course, we have rates being increased from the increase that would have happened back in 2021 are happening now. So people get their bill and they're thinking, double? Like my policy doubled? And it's at a point where it's just completely unaffordable. And there's a lot of other things that go into that with the cost of construction and homes built where they probably shouldn't be, to be frank.
Sure.
But it's obviously, it's a crisis for everybody.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned in talking to some insurance candidates is that it's often a position that's used as a springboard for
sure.
other political office.
Right.
And we've seen where that office is not only used as a springboard, but where identity politics has
100%.
become maybe more important than being effective.
Yep.
I think that there's a place for all people to be in United States government, city, federal, state, local level, but are certain characteristics, are those the qualities that are considered necessary for running a very important position? And I'd be curious what your thoughts are, that particularly I think maybe in the Democratic Party, it seems to be very dominated by this conversation of identity politics versus maybe sometimes doing the right thing. I think all of us can agree. We're all for love and diversity and all those things. Sure. But I think at this point, we're getting to a point where we just want effectiveness. Maybe
that's exactly right.
That should be the criteria. And are you seeing, or are you feeling, kind of where do you sit on that? Where I think a lot of people who are, maybe center left or left, we're getting frustrated with a city and a state that is dominated by one party, particularly that sort of identity politics. We're saying. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I'm a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I've seen so much partisanship over the past several years and identity politics, like you're talking about. And at the end of the day, we need someone who knows how to do the job and is dedicated to doing the job. That is the only thing that should matter. So I think when we look at things like getting more diversity into leadership, which is something that is very important, I think we need to take a step back and think about how can we invest into communities that have traditionally been underserved, to make sure that we're investing into young people that will end up being in a position to be leaders, and also doing things to reverse the effects of having redlining for generations, where minorities couldn't buy homes in particular neighborhoods, so they weren't able to go to better schools, and this was something that impacted generations. But I think the way we turn that around is by changing our policies at the housing level to make sure that we're investing in certain communities and making sure that we're pulling people up, out of poverty and pulling people into the middle class and making investments into young people so that we have more leaders to choose from, 10, 15, 20 years from now, instead of, picking leaders now based on something outside of what their abilities are as a leader. Because the way to, the goal of any leader should be to improve the quality of life for everyone equally. And I think that's what we really need to put at the top of the list is competency. And that's not, unfortunately, we've seen situations where that's not always the case. And to speak to the partisanship piece, yeah, I think so many folks I talk to nowadays just say, I just want someone who's the best person for the job. Yeah. And there's certainly people that, hold Democratic values dear and people that hold Republican values dear. But what I've found is that there's really not a whole lot of space between those, not as much as people think. Mm-hmm. It's the space that's between the extremes on the left and the extremes on the left, the extremes on the right, where you have all this space. But we really don't need either extreme. They're not going to do us any good.
Are we seeing those extremes in LA City Council?
Yeah, so on the current City Council, the best example of that type of extreme politics is the rise of what's called the DSA. Mm-hmm. And so the DSA stands for the Democratic Socialists of America. And so I was talking about one of the things that motivated me to run earlier being the defund the police movement, which is one of the priorities for the DSA. So you have defund the police, you have the de-commoditization of housing to make housing social, you have policies that generally are not helpful to business. These are the priorities that the DSA has. They do believe in socialism, hence the name. And currently on the City Council, you have 4 folks that are part of the DSA. We have a city controller that is DSA. And this election coming up on June 2nd is incredibly important because there's a potential that we might be able to take the current City Council and get maybe, 4 DSA members, 2 of them are coming up for re-election. So maybe we can turn that around. But on the other side, we could actually end up with more DSA folks on the City Council. We could end up with a DSA city attorney. We're probably going to continue to have a DSA city controller. And then maybe biggest of all, we have a DSA candidate for mayor, Nithya Raman. And that is a very real possibility. And in the event we end up with DSA leadership in Los Angeles, my point being, what I've seen with the DSA is their decisions are based more on ideology instead of the actual obligations of a leader to make the community better. So this job is about customer service. It's about filling potholes, making sure you don't wait on 30 minutes for 911, making sure parks are clean for kids to be able to play. It's not ideology. And my concern is that if we have a DSA-led government here in the city of Los Angeles, we are going to continue to go down this road that we've been going down the last few years, which has not served us well.
Go ahead, Jay.
About 40 years or so ago, CSUN actually came out with a report of the viability associated with the San Fernando Valley seceding from Los Angeles, right? And it's, at least the circles that we're talking with, folks are bringing this up as, now I don't know if it's the right way or if it's possible, but just kind of get your thoughts on the viability of that.
I get why it came up. The more I learn as I'm running for office, I think back to when the Valley did try to secede, and I think that was 01 or 02 if I'm not mistaken, when we actually did try to do that, and we obviously weren't successful because the reality of that is the entire city of LA gets to vote on that. So even if the Valley says, we want out of this deal, the entire city of LA gets to vote, and most of LA is like, you got a lot of tax revenue coming from you guys. Sure. Why on earth would we let you leave? And so I do, I understand why that idea came up. And in regard to my thoughts on it, if it came up as something that was on the ballot today, and I never, I typically pride myself on giving a yes or no answer on anything, but the reality is I don't actually know the mechanics of what's involved in starting our own police department, starting our own fire department, our own sanitation. Would we contract with LADWP? And so those are things that I frankly don't know the answer to. Would they be cost prohibitive? But I do know that there's an issue right now where we're not getting what we pay for as the Valley, and that's a problem. And that's a problem that can't remain the way it is. I think we're all tired of being the redheaded stepchild, and so that's something I think we need to address.
I want to ask you both a question. Jared, you're a professor at CSUN. Would love to talk to you briefly about that. And Tim, you're obviously passionate working with young people. Maybe it's the rise of social media. Maybe it's the ideologues of the DSA, things like that. Are young people being incentivized for public service, to do the right thing, for accountability, leadership? I'm really curious, since both of you have your finger on the pulse of youth today, perhaps. Jared, maybe let me ask you, what are you seeing at CSUN? Maybe tell folks what you do
Yeah.
and what you're saying.
So I've been very fortunate in my business, in my life, to be able to bring home a decent living, not only for myself, my family, but also for my 20 some odd employees that work for me. What gets me up in the morning is the passion for my employees, making sure that they're taking care of their families. And then secondly is to also add value to the community, which I think we share that sort of vision. And so as an adjunct professor, I feel like it's my opportunity to give back to the community. A lot of my students are first-time college, folks, the first time going to college for their families. And so that, knowing that I have the ability to help shape and help mold, not indoctrinate,
Right.
but to provide a platform where they can critically analyze whatever we're talking about in our scope of our discussion. But I spend a lot of time talking about leadership. I spend a lot of time in my class putting the book Real Estate Law and Principles aside, and let's talk about contributing positively to our community through law or through business, whatever it might be. So I think it's a really unique position that I've been blessed with, that I'm able to give back now to the community at large. And I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds, you're very similar in kind of your track as well.
Yeah, I think I like what you said about your motivation as a business person, because I've always found the businesses that are most successful and the leaders that are most successful in their business are not the ones that focus on things like profitability so much. It's the ones that actually focus on investing in their team members, doing a great job for their customers, and investing into the community. Yeah. And it's sort of like, positive karma that returns and helps you, helps grow your business. I think that's very true. And I love what you said about CSUN, because I know, and you already know this obviously, the CSUN is one of the top schools in the entire country for social mobility. So there are more first-time in their family college students than almost any other university in the country, which I think is such a great thing to pull people to, move people up into the middle class, which is wonderful. And what every generation, I think a lot of times they talk about the youngest generation as if like there's something wrong with them. They're lazy, or you can remember people saying that about kids in the 50s or 60s, right? Of course. And so I think when I look at young people
I'm pretty sure our parents said it about us.
Absolutely.
They did. Well, they certainly said it about me.
He had a team of lawyers from Pepsi show up to his house. His parents definitely said that about him.
That's exactly right. So when I see young people today, I see potential leaders that we have an opportunity to be able to mold. And so the most important thing we can do as a society and as a community is to be able to create an environment and create opportunities for these young people. And then just as importantly, making sure they know about them. Yeah. And so, you take your average young person right now that's in junior high or high school, and they go to school, and then when they get out of school, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, what do they do with their time at that point? Because if they're, latchkey kids, like maybe some of us were, and they're not involved in something, maybe they go home and they have idle time then between 3 and 6, 3 and 7 that might be something positive, might not be. And teenagers, a lot of times, it has a tendency to be the latter without guidance.
Sure.
And so the more opportunities there are for programs like, YMCA Youth in Government being one, or, Boys and Girls Club programs, LAPD PALs, and then having a mechanism where we have folks actually go door to door and make sure young people have this information, that's our opportunity to be able to turn the young people we have now into leaders. And I think, honestly, that's what young people want. People want something to believe in. They want to be able to believe in themselves. And we obviously, as a society, we desperately need that. We need leaders that want to help the community, that don't believe in things like, partisan politics, to be frank, that just want to make the community better. And I think that this is a great generation to be able to send that message.
Yeah, I agree, and I love that both of you are attacking it. A similar issue, you're Jared, more on the academic side. Tim, you've been doing it all throughout your life in different community-based organizations, and now journeying into politics, which I think is fantastic, and I think can really be an inspiration. I mean, it's like you said, all politics is local, but it's the job that you will soon be doing is fixing potholes. I mean, it's just a simple. That's the kind of stuff. Yeah, we can sit and watch the news and scream at the TV all day long about what's going on in the federal government. But if I just damaged my car because of a pothole, pole
Right,
on my neighbor. Like somehow that hits a little bit differently. And I think that the job of city council is so critical to just get those basic services done, because I think we have this tendency to think, oh, the world is collapsing because this person's president or that person's mayor, something like that. But when basic systems in a city are failing, that's the problem. That's where societies begin to crumble.
And we learned, we were in business school, the broken glass theory, right? Out of, I think it was New York, right?
Yeah, correct. Chief Bratton.
Yeah.
Chief Bratton.
And so we're plagued with graffiti throughout this entire city. I forget where I was recently, but there was Las Vegas. I was in Las Vegas for a tournament. There was no graffiti in Las Vegas.
Right. Yep.
And to come back to Los Angeles and seeing just the abundant amount of graffiti here, one idea that we had with somebody else that talked about, let's get the homeless people, let's get them trained in a program where they have to go on the streets and start cleaning up the graffiti.
Yep.
You know, how likely is that? What's your vision to clean up the graffiti? Because I think that will help with the potholes and the broken glass theories and getting the city back, especially with the Olympics coming up and the World Cup, et cetera. Maybe you could talk about your vision around that as well.
Yeah, I think, I love that idea of having the unhoused to help with graffiti. And I think it's a great idea because, one, we obviously need to address the graffiti, but just as important, you're giving someone a purpose for that day. And I think we all need that in our lives, as a purpose to be able to do something and be satisfied that you got that done, right? I think that's so incredibly important. It could be a big part of being able to pull people out of a negative situation. And in regard to the broken window theory, absolutely I agree with you. And that's how Chief Bratton turned New York around, when frankly, New York at that time in the early 90s was far worse than LA is right now. Financially, crime-wise, I mean, it was awful from what I've read about it. I didn't live there at the time, obviously, but certainly in a tough spot, because when you have an environment that has graffiti and trash everywhere, the people that live there feel like nobody cares.
Yeah.
And that's especially important with the young people that live there, that feel like nobody cares about this community, which they internalize as, nobody cares about me, I don't have value. That's why it's so important that we turn this around and have a community that looks nice, that people can be proud of. And I think the city doesn't have the resources to be able to do all of it, although I do think the city can do a lot more. But there's so many community members that I think would be willing to be volunteers if we had it organized the right way. I'm part of a group that goes out every Saturday morning at 8 in the morning in the Valley to either clean up trash or paint over graffiti. And it's been growing like crazy as people tell each other about it. And I think a lot of the reason they do it is it helps the community, it looks better, but it's also a great way to start your Saturday morning. You're getting out, you're moving around, you're doing something good. And I think that's something that can catch on, that we can get everybody moving in the right direction. And the key to it is making it so that a clean community without graffiti needs to become the norm. And I look at places like Tokyo. So I don't know if you've ever been to Tokyo. Tokyo is a huge city, obviously. And it's a city that is one of the cleanest in the world. And what's interesting is there's also no trash cans there, because if somebody has trash, they carry it around. They don't drop it on the street because it'd be shameful, and the norm is not to litter. And so I do believe, I'm optimistic that we can get LA to a point where the norm is not littering, it's not dumping trash, it's not graffiti, because we respect where we live and we want it to look nice for our family and the next generation. I think that's something we can get to, but the first thing is we need to believe that's possible. And I believe it's possible for LA, I believe it's possible for this district, and I'm going to do everything I could possibly do if elected to push things in that direction.
You made me think of, I've traveled to Japan, to Tokyo, I've been to South Korea as well, and one of the things I noticed is there's a respect for community space. For example, I remember I was on a tour bus to the DMZ, and someone started playing music on their cell phone on the tour bus. And the tour guide very firmly said, you need to stop that right now and turn that off.
I love that.
And there was this respect of like, we share this space together.
That's right.
And if there was ever a job for noise czar of Los Angeles, I would volunteer for that, because I'm so tired of my space being crowded by other people's cell phone conversations, they're watching of social media and so on. It's just like, I'm here in the elevator. I can hear your entire conversation. It drives me up a wall. But I don't know that there's a position for that yet, but I am running for it in case you need me.
I think it'd probably be a volunteer position. But
Saturday mornings?
Those opportunities are
fair enough. All right, we will talk about that. But I think it goes to this underlying symptom that, like, being accountable for one another, that hey, this is our city, this is our space. However you define your community, whether it's your little street, or whether it's yourself, your family, your little street, your neighborhood, your city, your state, whatever it is, whatever your tribe is, your community is, respect it. And respect that others are there, whether they agree with you or not.
That's right. It's your responsibility as a community member.
Yeah, and stop pointing fingers at people.
That's right.
All right, Tim, a little bit of a lightning round, quick questions here. Los Angeles World Cup. Are we ready?
We're as ready as we're ever going to be. The World Cup is coming here, whether we're ready or not. I do think the city will rise to the occasion. I do think the World Cup will be successful, and hopefully it will be something that is very public to sort of turn around the image that Los Angeles has right now, which might not be great. Let's take this opportunity to turn it around and turn it into something positive.
Very good. All right, next one. Olympics, Los Angeles 2028. I mean, even bigger than the World Cup. Hopefully you'll be in office. I know you will be. What's your plan?
Well, I hope I'm in office. You know, before the 1984 Olympics, people in LA were really worried about, people were saying before 84, we're not ready, you know, it's going to be terrible, and it turned out to be a big success. We made money from it. I think the same opportunity exists in LA, but everybody in our community, everybody who lives in this city is going to have to take it as a personal responsibility to get us ready for the Olympics, whether it be cleaning up trash outside, helping paint over graffiti, whatever you can bring to the table for this city. If each person steps up and does that, we are absolutely going to be ready for the Olympics. We're going to put our best foot forward, and the folks that come to LA are going to enjoy the city. Hopefully it's not raining that couple of weeks. And it could be the big thing, the big event that turns things around for the next generation for us.
Love it. You know, obviously you're aware there's a group that's trying to cancel the Olympics,
right.
But I love the positivity that I think you're right. This could be a nice tipping point for the city. All right, last question. Tim, we've covered a lot today, and I could sit and chat with you for hours because I think you've got a lot of unique points, and I think you are more than qualified for the job, so we're excited to support you.
Thank you.
All right, Tim, before we go, for folks who couldn't watch the entire thing, why Tim Gaspar? Why are you running, and how are you going to make a difference?
I think that's a really important question to ask. So the reason I'm running for CD3 is, look, I'm just a guy that grew up in the Valley that thinks he has the tools and the skills to be able to improve the quality of life for everyone that lives here and everyone that works here, whether you own a business or otherwise. My goal is to make life better. And whoever's running for this seat and whoever gets elected, that needs to be their primary objective and their primary goal above all else. And you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? And we've done that with our city council, where we have a tendency as a city to elect folks that come from a political background. And that typically happens because the LA, you know, the political system within LA is one that is designed to support folks that are already in politics, and we certainly don't have enough time to get into all the mechanics of that, but I'm sure you could take some guesses as to why that is. But we need something different. We need someone who, number one, has a business background so that that voice can be in the room to be able to, you know, suggest things that will actually work for the city, what things can bring jobs back to the city and business back to the city. That part's really important. And also someone with leadership experience. The city council seat is one that is certainly full-time, but it's also when you have a staff of approximately 30 people or so, and this person's going to need to have the ability to inspire people to work hard, to really be able to be dedicated to their roles, and also row in the same direction towards what the goals are for that particular district. That's incredibly important, and that's not something that we don't want someone who is new to that, where there's a learning curve. We need someone that's going to hit the ground running right away to be successful with this role. And I'll tell you, you know, I'm not running for the title. I'm running to do the job. And I just hope that the most important thing for folks is to vote on June 2nd. Yep. That's the primary vote. I talked about it earlier. There's a lot at stake for the city this time. And by all means, learn about all the candidates. You know, check out the background of each candidate, what their priorities are, what skill set do they have, and what's their resume look like to actually be successful with those things, and make a decision based on that. And obviously, I feel that I'll be able to do this job successfully, and my heart is in it 100%. But obviously, I want folks to make a decision based on what they feel in their heart and who's the best person to do the job. And I'm looking forward to, having a good rest of the run over this next couple of months, and looking forward to what happens on June 2nd. So thank you so much for
Tim
having me
Gaspar,
today.
thank you so much. That was wonderful. I love that you're running for something as opposed to just being critical of something. It's so refreshing, and I think this is exactly what Los Angelinos need. If you want to learn more about Tim Gaspar, please go to timgaspar.com, and of course you can support Tim in his campaign for Los Angeles City Council, District 3. Even if you don't live in that community, you can still support his campaign. We urge you to go on to timgaspar.com, make a donation, and learn more about him. June 2nd is the election. I know it's a primary. It's not everyone's favorite thing to do, especially when you don't see it on the news everywhere. But it's really critical that you go out there June 2nd, you see Tim Gaspar's name on there, make sure you vote for him. Tim, again, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. If you are a property owner and you have a property that needs management, please look up KIG Property Management. That's KIGPM.com. That's again, KIG Property Management, KIGPM.com. And if you want to chat about insurance and all the fun that insurance has to bring throughout the city of Los Angeles, state of California, please visit KarpelInsurance.com. Again, full service brokerage here in Los Angeles. That's Karpel Insurance, KARPEL Insurance.com. And thank you so much for joining today.